Hi everybody. Thought I would make a binding video for the Kimberbell Cuties so that you could refer back to the way I do the binding with the machine. I assume that most of you know how to make binding, but I will post in the description of this video, I will post a little document called Bind Aid that explains how to cut your binding and how to sew it together. This has been sewn together on the diagonal, like at a 45-degree angle. And but this little bind aid document is a wonderful document to use if you're not sure about how to make binding. A lot of you have made binding before. And so mostly what I want to show with this video is the way I sew on the binding with the sewing machine. I find it very fast and quick, and it's easy to do, and I think it looks really nice, especially when you're making a lot of smaller items, and then you don't have to hand stitch. Of course, you can sew it on and hand stitch it down if that's what you prefer to do. All right, so I like to show everybody how I do this with the sewing machine. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got my binding already. This is 2 1/4 inch binding. I prefer 2 1/4 inch binding because I like my binding to be tight. You can of course make 2 1/2 inch binding if that works better for you. And so I have already prepared my binding, and this is 2 widths for this Kimberbell Cutie, or all the cuties I should say. It's 2 full widths of a fabric plus a half a one. So it's like 2 1/2 strips that are 2 1/4 inches. Okay, so I'm going to do this by machine. So what I like to do is I like to sew the binding on the back. So I'm going to turn this over, and I'm going to sew this binding on the back. So I got my binding here. I am going to set my machine to do a 1/4 inch piecing stitch on the machine, and I like to use the J foot and the Q02 stitch, which will move the needle over to the right. I like to use the length, second here, tip it down a little bit, at 2.5, because 2.0 I make a lot of mistakes, so sometimes I have to rip. So I don't like to rip at 2.0. That's what the default setting is. So I save that in there. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to put our binding on here. Second. And I'm going to leave a little tail. I'm going to start kind of about 2/3 of the way along this side. I'm going to put the raw edges together, and I'm going to start stitching my 1/4 inch seam. Okay, I'm going to tie this off. I left about 5 or 6 inches at the end of my little piece here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch from the edge all the way down. And again, I'm on the back of the little top here. Tip this up just a little bit for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the end, and I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch from the edge. I'm going to tie off and cut my thread. And then I'm going to flip this around the corner, and now we need to make our beautiful 45-degree angle here. Okay, so I'm going to pull this up at a 45-degree angle, if I can get a hold of this. Right here to the tip, here's the tip of the corner, 45-degree angle. I'm going to flip it up, and then I'm going to pull it straight down, and those raw edges are going to go right along together. Okay, so I'm going to flip this down. And again, this is on the back. Now, if you're going to hand stitch your binding on, you're going to be sewing this on the front of your tabletop. Okay, so whichever works better for you. I just like to do everything with the machine because I do so many bindings. It's much faster for me to do it this way. All right, so we're going to get all of our raw edges together. But if you want to hand stitch it on the front. So we're doing our 1/4 inch seam down this side. Get this lined up again. And that little zigzag that I did along the edge, you know, to kind of baste everything down is all going to be in the seam. You're not going to see any of that. Okay, and if you notice, I have my pivot feature on my machine, so my foot comes up when I stop, and the needle drops, and that little button is right here on most of the machines. It looks like a foot with a little needle on it. So I like the pivot feature because then you don't have to touch a bunch of buttons when you're starting and stopping. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here, and we're going to go down towards the end and stop about 1/4 of an inch from the corner. And I have a tendency to kind of eyeball this. It's really, you can kind of tell where you're about 1/4 of an inch ends. So I really don't measure them. I used to measure so carefully, but I kind of have gotten so I don't. Okay, so we're going to turn this around again. Okay, we're going to go up to the 45-degree angle. Okay, make it nice and straight. And then we're going to bring it straight down with those raw edges together. Just like that. And that little bind aid document that I told you about, I will put the link to it on Dropbox, and it's a really nice little document that I had never done binding before. Years ago, a friend gave it to me so that I could learn to make binding because I had never done binding before, and it really is helpful. It has some good pictures in it, and this is how I learned how to do binding. Now I learned to do the machine binding from Gudrun Erla. She does her binding this sort of like this. Mine's a little different, but this is how I watch some of her videos, learning to do binding by machine, because I do so many samples that I find I need to be able to get my binding done a little quicker. So that's why I like to do it by machine. All right, so we're going along this edge now. But I thought I'd just put this video right with all of the cuties so that there's a binding video and a quilting video for each of for the whole year, so that it's right in the same folder. That way you can go back and refer to it if you need help with the binding. And then I'll put that link to Bind Aid if you need help getting your binding cut and everything. Okay, so I'm getting close to the end again here. Doesn't take long to get around here. All right, so I'm going to stop about 1/4 of an inch from the end again. Looks about right. I'm going to tie it off, and then I'll cut. Okay, then we're going to go around the corner. And again, I'm going to do my 45-degree angle. So I'm going to go up. Just a second here, I got this stuck. I'm going to go straight up. I'm going to make my 45-degree angle. Okay. And then I'm going to match up my raw edges again. Get everything all nice and matched up. Like that. And then we will go down this side. And I like to tie off where I do the little folds so that I know that it's good and tied off on that corner. So I'm going to go down this side, 1/4 of an inch. And I like to do the 1/4 inch piecing with my, sorry, I've got some tails on here. I'm trimming tails as I see them. Okay. I like to do the 1/4 inch piecing stitch with the machine, because that way when I get ready, because the next step I'm going to be doing is zigzagging. So then I don't have to change the foot out. So it works really well with Q02. All right, so we're going to go down this side. Getting just about around the corner here, so it doesn't take very long to put binding on. So this is not a very big item, so it doesn't take too long to do the binding with the machine. All right, get this all straightened out here, and then I'm going to go down and I'm going to stop about 1/4 of an inch from the end again. Okay, that looks about right. And like I said, I kind of eyeball it now. I used to really measure and be very careful, but I would say be as close as you can, but you don't need to be spot on, because it'll be just fine. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up, my 45-degree angle here. Okay, and I'm going to bring it straight down and line up those raw edges again. Okay. then we're going to tie off again. And I'm using the little polka dot button up here to tie off instead of doing a reverse. I like this because it just ties a knot in place. So it doesn't veer off or anything for me. So I don't usually use a back stitch. You can if you want. I have a little trouble with the machine like veering off a little bit to the left, so I like it to just tie a knot. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do this, and we're going to leave a little space. So we're on the last side here. We're going to leave a little space so we have a little room to work and do a flip. So I'm going to sew just a little bit further, and now I'm going to tie this part off. And then I'll show you how to do this little flip. It's very easy. Okay, so I'm just going to lay this down flat on my machine, and so I have this little space right here. Now I do have a little selvage on this end, so I am going to go ahead and just trim that off, just in case I need this end. So I'll trim the selvage off quickly first. Just going to fold it in half so it's nice and straight, and I'll cut it off. There we go. Okay, so how I do the flip, let me grab a couple of pens here. So I've got a pen, and I think this is my friction pen. That'll work. And let's see. Oh, here we go. And I need a ruler. Okay. So what I'm going to do, and this is the way it shows on bind aid, and I've always done binding this way, and it seems to work really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push. This is the where we started. This is the side we started on. Okay. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to turn it down at a 45-degree angle, just like that. Okay. Then this piece is where we stopped. So this is the longer piece where we stopped. And I'm going to lay this up against the raw edge, and I'm just going to kind of turn it down like that. And then I'm going to lay the other piece that I just flipped over on top of it. And this seems to work the best for me. So I'm going to lay this down. Okay, and then here's where we ended over here. And I'm going to take, since this is 2 1/4 inch binding, I need to take my little ruler, and I'm going to measure from the end of this piece 2 1/4 inches. Okay, so I've got the 2 1/4 inches right on the end of my little piece here. And I'm going to stick a pin in the back piece of the binding, because that's the part we're going to cut off, the part where we ended. So I'm just going to stick a pin in there. Check my measurement. Okay, so there's my pin in that back part of the binding. And sometimes I'll just remeasure it again, lay it flat again, put the pin in, and then here's my end of my piece where we started, and I'm going to make sure that it's 2 1/4 inches. Now, if you're doing 2 1/2 inch binding, you would measure 2 1/2 inches. So depending on the width of your binding. Now mine is 2 1/4. So we're going to do this. That looks good. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is where that pin is, I'm just going to take this binding, I'm going to fold it in half, right where the pin is, and I'm going to trim this up because we need it to overlap that 2 1/4 inches in my case. Okay, so we're just going to turn that over, and I'm going to take my scissors and trim it up. Okay, so then we got our 2 ends trimmed off. So I have a little piece left over. Okay, give me a second, I need to get a couple pins out here. Okay, so to get this to be together, then we need to sew it together, the ends together, of course. This is how I'm going to do this little flip. So this is the part that a lot of people get confused about, but it is pretty easy when you think about it. So this is the way I do it, and this is the way the picture is on bind aid. Okay, so I've got this one turned down at a 45-degree angle. This is where we started on the left. The right hand side, I'm going to open it up and put the right side up like this. Okay, so I'm just going to lay it open up here like that. Okay, then I'm going to, I might have to take a couple little stitches out. This is a little short, so just a second. I'm going to take a few stitches out of here just because I need just a little bit more room to flip this over. So I'll just take a few stitches out of this side. Sometimes I have to do that because it's just a little short. It's just a little hard to get it turned. There we go. Okay. We can sew it back up again. I'm going to lay this flat, right side up, Okay, then I'm going to take the left side over here, and I've got it turned down at a 45-degree angle. I'm going to continue in the same direction. So I'm going to grab this open. I'm going to start opening this, okay? But I'm going to continue in the same direction, and then the right sides will be together, okay? So I'm going to lay this down on top of this and match the corner like that. And then I'm going to pin this corner together. And it shows this picture really well on that little document. So I will make sure that I put that in the description of this video so you can find that document, because it's really, this really helped me. I had never done this before, and I totally learned it from this little piece of paper. It's like one piece of paper. So it was so much easier, okay? So then we're going to do this, put some pins in here to pin these together. All right, so now what we have to do is we have to sew this together at a diagonal, just like I did the other parts of the binding. But it's easier for me if I know exactly where that corner is. So there's my corner there. So I'm just going to take my little marking pen and just put a mark right there in the corner so I know exactly where it is. Then I'm going to do the same thing over here. So I have something to shoot for. Okay. And then I'm going to move my machine to Q01, which is the needle in the center needle position. So it's now moved to the center. It's a little easier now. And I'm going to, whoops, fold this kind of in half because I want this to lay real flat. And that's why I took a few stitches out back here so that everything will lay flat. If it's too short, it's very hard to keep everything laying flat for you when you want to do this. This is the hardest part, is to get this little flip sewn together. Okay, so I've got my little mark right there. I want to make sure that little corner underneath is right where my mark is. Okay, and then this mark is laying right on the end too. All right, so I got my needle now in the center. I'm going to place my needle down, and I'm going to take a couple stitches and then tie off. Oops, I think I just threaded my needle though. I did. So now you get to watch me thread the machine. Look at that. Hopefully we can get it in there. There we go. This thread is very soft. This is Pima cotton. I really like this Pima cotton, but it is thin and soft. So it does unthread occasionally. So, all right, let's try that again. So I'll put the needle down right on my mark in the center. I'm going to take a stitch and then just tie it off. Okay. And then I'm going to do a straight line to this other line right here. So I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I really rarely, you can draw a line here if you want to, if that helps you, but I usually just eyeball it. I do pretty well with it. All right, so there's our straight stitch across here. So I'm going to take these pins out now, and we're going to lay this flat again against the bed of the machine. Whoops, something has to be right upside down. There we go. And then I'm going to make sure that when I turn this, that everything is laying properly, and that looks right. Okay, so now I can trim this out. I don't trim until I've checked it to make sure that I got it correct. All right, so then we're going to trim this off about 1/4 of an inch away from the end, from the seam, I should say. And then I'm just going to finger press this open. I like to press it open. And that's what I did with the other seams when I put my binding together. Okay, and then we're going to pin this in, and this is going to be our final stitching, and we have continuous binding. So and then this one I usually pin. I don't like to pin, I don't usually pin when I'm doing the rest of the binding, but I do like to pin when I do this little opening just to help me keep everything straight. Okay, get this all pinned in here. And then I need to go back to about here just to make sure that it stays well. Get another pin in here. All right, so then we're going to stitch this with our 1/4 inch. So I'm going to switch back to Q02 and move my needle to the right, and then I'm going to have my 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to go back to about where that pin is, line up my 1/4 inch, and I'll tie that off again. Remember, I had to take a few stitches out of that. And then we're going to sew along this edge. Okay, I can take these pins out so we can kind of go here. I think we'll be okay. I'm going to do my 1/4 inch seam. Some people like to put their binding on with a walking foot. That works as well. So if you like a walking foot, go ahead and use your walking foot. I find it a little harder to get my 1/4 inch seam really accurate with a walking foot, so I usually don't use one. Okay. And then we're going to, and I'm going to give this just a little pressure because I've got just a teeny little bit of bulk in there. Okay, so we're going to do our 1/4 inch seam. Okay. Just easing some fullness out of it. There we go. All right, and then I'm going to tie off after that pin. All right, get my pins out of the way here and cut off. All right, so here's our binding. I had a little bit of fullness right here, but I don't think it's going to show much. So the next step is, sure if I did, yeah, that'll be fine. So the next step is going to be when I do this from the front and I'm going to be hand stitching, I do not press this down. But when I do this from the back and do this with the machine, I am going to take this over to my ironing board now and give this a very crisp crease along the seam. And this is on the back, okay? Because that way when I pull this around and go to stitch this on, I'm going to have a nice crease back here in order to get it to line up well. Okay, so I'm going to take this over to my ironing board and I'm going to crisply press all of this binding out along that seam line, and then I'll show you how I'm going to attach it on the front. I'll turn off the video for a minute while I go do the ironing. Okay, so I have pressed this binding on the back and got a nice crisp seam along here. Okay, so the first thing I'll do now is I'll go ahead and I'm going to make those beautiful 45-degree angles in the corners. And that's really the only place that I pin or clip or anything. The rest of it I just hold. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clip on my first corner here. I'm just going to take one of my little binder clips. I like these little binder clips. Okay, these little clover clips. And I'm just going to clip a little ways from the corner on each side just to hold that binding in place for me while I'm trying to do my corner. And then we'll put a pin in the corner. Okay. So I've got a couple little strings here. I'm just going to go ahead and clip out of there. And I'm going to lay my binding right along my seam line that I sewed. Okay. And I'm going to push up the corner. So I'm on the right hand side and I'm going to push up on the corner and make a beautiful 45-degree angle up here, and then I'm going to pull it down into the corner, and I'm using that seam line that I sewed on just now to line up my corners. I'm having just a little trouble with this one. Sometimes I have trouble, so we'll turn it a little bit. I think it's clipped down a little too far. There we go. Sometimes I have to turn it a little bit more. So I'm just sticking my fingernail. I'm going to grab a pin here so I have one ready. I'm going to push my fingernail up into that corner, make a 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to pull it down into the corner, meeting my two corners up. So this little corner, and then I'm going to take my pin, and I'm going to stick it right in that joining section and stick the pin in there like that. And so it makes a nice corner like that. Okay, and I'm going to leave these pins in. Just be careful not to stab yourself. They're kind of sharp. And then I'm going to move and do another corner here. So let's get some of these little strings out of here. This binding was a little bit rabbly, so let's get some strings out of here. My goodness, this one was really bad. Cut some more strings. Okay, so we're going to bring this forward. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take a couple of my little binder clips, bring it right down to the line, just a little ways from the end, or from the corner, I should say. And then on each side. And this just helps me hang on to this. And this is really the only place that I pin when I'm doing this. Okay, so then we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my thumb, and push it up into the corner. I'm lining up the line, my seam line. Okay, I'm going to push this up into the corner. Let me grab another pin here. I'm going to push this up into the corner, make a nice 45-degree angle, and then bring it straight down, and I'm going to line up that other line on the side. Okay, so I'm lining up the edge of it with that line and making it nice and square. Then I'm going to put a pin right in the corner. So I always start on the inside and go to the corner with the pin, because it really holds that corner nice and firmly then, like that. Okay, so there's a beautiful corner. Let's do another one here. Okay, I'm going to get a couple clips. Clip these down. I think I'm really going to like this one. This is turning out really nice. This is the May Cutie, so I just happened to be working on the May one when I needed to do these videos. I've made several of other ones. I think I've showed most of them to you. But I just happened, this is the May one, so this is the flowers. So it's May flowers. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm lining up my seam line with the edge of my binding, and I'm going to push my thumbnail up into there, get my pin ready, and then I'm going to bring it down to the other seam line here. So just a second here, I got to turn it just a little more. Ugh. Kind of at the wrong angle. There we go. Like this. Got a little bit of a couple little tails sticking out here, so let's clip those off. Okay. All right, so up into the corner, 45-degree angle, and then bring it down along the seam line and line up my seams. This one's being particularly difficult for some reason. Sometimes I'll have one corner that just doesn't want to go for me. I don't know why. I think it's just Murphy's Law. All right, there, that one's better. That's better now. Okay, so I'm going to get my corner, and I'm going to push that into there and line it all up. That looks pretty good. Okay, so there's a nice straight corner. Nice 45-degree angle. Now let's do the last one. A couple of my clips. It's taken me some time to get used to doing it this way. You know, I had always just sewn the binding on the front and turned it to the back and hand stitched it. But I don't really like to hand stitch, and I'm so often doing things that I need to get done in a hurry, and so it takes me a while to stitch around them. So I started doing this machine binding, and I really like it. Okay, so I'm going to line up that line. But I like to use a zigzag instead of a straight stitch, because I feel like I do better with it. Not quite lined up. Just a second, I'm kind of at the wrong angle here to turn it this way. Push up into the center of the corner and pull down and get those middle sections lined up. There we go. And up into the corner. There we go. Okay, so then we have another nice 45-degree angle on our corner. Okay, so I'm going to leave those pins in there so that they'll help me keep everything straight. Now the trick with this, and you're going to have to, I'm going to turn the video off for a second. I'm just about out of bobbin thread, so I'm going to wind another bobbin before I start the zigzagging. But the trick with this, don't start in a corner. Start like on one of the sides, you know, towards the end or in the middle or wherever you want. But don't start in the corner, because it's real hard. The corners are easier if you work into them. So give me a second. I'm going to wind a bobbin real quick because I realized I'm almost out of thread. Okay, so I got my bobbin back in here. Now I've got a real nice Pima cotton thread that's a real light gray, like this binding. And what I do when I'm doing this is you need to use a real matchy thread to your binding, or monofilament works real well if you don't have something that matches. I just happen to have a nice gray that's very matching to this, so I'm just going to use a gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start let's start up a mole right in here somewhere. I'm just going to turn this binding back. And what I'm trying to do is I'm going to line up the edge of my binding. It's caught on my foot here. I'm going to line up the edge of my binding. I'm just barely going to cover that seam line where we sewed it on, okay? Because we don't want that to show. And I'm going to put my foot down. I like to use my J foot for this. And the J foot has a little notch right in the center of the foot, and that's where the needle position is, and that helps me keep straight because I can watch that little notch there to run right along the edge of my binding. So I'm going to choose a zigzag stitch, and I like to use, I'm going to go back to the standard tab, number 1, and I'm going to use 1-10. And I have this saved in my machine at a certain size. I like to use the width of 2.0, so it's very narrow, and then the length of 1.4. So it's not real long, but it's a little longer. It doesn't look like a satin stitch. It looks like a zigzag. But it's very narrow, and what I'm going to do with that narrow zigzag then is I'm going to take the zig is going to be off the binding and the zag is going to be on it. So I'm going to take, that's why I want that little notch to lay right along the edge of my binding. And the binding is just going to cover that seam line that we stitched our binding on. So I'm just going to drop my needle. It's on my binding right now. And I'm just going to start zigzagging. Actually, I'm going to tie this off first. Okay, so there's one stitch on the binding and one stitch off the binding to the left. Okay, so I'm going to get this all lined up. We don't want to see that little line in there. And I'm going to start my zigzag. Whoops, I don't think except that I didn't thread my machine again. So let's try this again, shall we? Helps if you, after you wind a bobbin, if you thread the machine. So we'll just thread it again. Here we go. We'll start that again. I do this all the time. I forget to wind, when you wind a bobbin, you know, I don't wind a lot of bobbins. I just do when I'm sewing. And so I don't wind embroidery bobbins. So I'm always forgetting to rethread the machine. Okay, so I get this turned and I've got it just turned over that line where we stitched, okay? And I've got that little notch on the foot right on the edge of my binding. So we're going to tie it off. So basically you're going to have a stitch on the binding and a stitch off the binding. All right, so I'm just going to line this up. I'm going to start stitching my zigzag. Stitch on the binding, a stitch off the binding. And it is very narrow. And like I said, try to find yourself a really nice matchy thread. So I've got some little tails here. So we're going to trim some of these off, get them out of our way. There we go. And I just hold it. I don't pin. And I'm going to take this clip out now, since that clip was to help us get our corner beautiful. Okay, give me just a second. I'm going to slip my glasses on, because when I get to the corner, sometimes I need my glasses. Okay, so I'm going to get this lined up. Just cover up that little line. And then I'm going to pull back a little bit with my finger to make sure that this corner stays nice and straight. I'm just going to check my line there. There we go. So I've got a stitch on the binding and a stitch off the binding. And then we're going to go into the corner slowly. And I'm going to leave that pin in there, because if I take the pin out, my corner won't be beautiful. So I'm going to turn this now. Notice my pivot feature went up. Okay, I'm going to leave my pin in there. So now what I'm going to do when I do look at this corner, get my line matched up, I'm going to put my foot down and I'm going to look and see if my little notch is on the edge of my binding, and it's a little bit off. So I'm going to raise my needle and I'm just going to slide this over just a little bit and drop my needle again, so that that little notch is right on the edge of my binding. Otherwise, it's going to come out the wrong, it's going to come out too close to the edge or something on my corner. So I want to make sure that I'm back in the center again. So we're just going to get it started here. There we go. Sometimes you have to give it just a little encouragement to get it going because there's a little bit of a bulk in there. Okay, so I'm lining that up. But the trick with this is to use, you know, the matchiest thread you can get. And if you don't have anything that's real matching, use the monofilament, and then it really doesn't show at all. I remember doing the first couple quilts I had black binding and I had black thread, and you couldn't even tell that it was zigzagged on. It looked so nice. And I've tried doing this with a straight stitch, but for me, I just can't stay straight enough. It looks crooked on the back then usually. And so this, I can stay straight for some reason. All right, so we're going around the edge. I'm staying the zig is on and the zag is off the binding. So let's get this turned over. Right. And I just kind of keep going around. We're going to go back into that next corner here. Second here. And just work your way around. So this is not hard. You just have to take your time. Watch where your stitches are going. But I really like 2 1/4 inch binding because it makes it tighter along the edge of the quilt. And so if you have a little trouble, if you think you're going to miss, you could go up to a 2 1/2, but your binding is going to be a little bit looser on the edge. Okay, so we're getting close to the second corner here. Get it lined up, covering that little seam line that we made, because we don't want that to show. Okay, so we got this clip, so I'm going to take this clip back out. Get this all lined up again. And this one's a little easier to see just because my binding is lighter than my border. So I can kind of see where the edges of it. Sometimes it's a little hard to see if everything matches. Okay, so I'm getting this and I'm going to hold this in. I'm going to pull back just a little bit to keep this nice and straight so I can get into my corner. Okay, a second here. I'm not quite lined up right here. There we go. So I'm going to go into the corner slowly. I'm going to leave that pin in there. Okay, there's our corner, and I'm going to go around the corner here. And then we're going to check to see if I need to alter my needle position. So, I'm a little off, so I need to raise my needle. I'm going to move that notch back to the edge of my binding, drop my needle again, and then I'm ready to go. So let's get this one out of our way here. And around this corner. So get this all lined up. There we go. And I still struggle a little bit with the corners. You know, my corners are not perfect, but they're looking a lot better. As the more you practice this, the better you'll get at it. So you just have to take your time. And I can get a lot of bindings done this way because it's so much faster than hand stitching them on. And there's times when I still hand stitch them. So then I put the binding on the front. Okay. So I'm going to keep going here. Do this side. And it does help to put your glasses on because then you can see a little bit better. Okay, there we go. Get it all lined up. The left side of the zigzag is off the binding and the right is on. All right, that's looking good. I really like the border on this one with that. I like that little flower design I used. All right, crossed here. I just do a little bit at a time and then I reposition. Whoops, I got a tail here that's in the way. There we go. And I just reposition, do a little bit at a time and then reposition. But I find it's better if I don't try to pin or anything, because if I pin, it's never in the right spot and I have to reposition anyway. So I just don't pin except from the corners. Okay, so there's that. Getting there here, so we'll keep going. Okay. And then get this turned over. It's looking pretty good. Okay, so now I need to get this clip out of the way. Get this lined up. Okay, now when I get to the corner, I want to pull a little bit in the corner like this, just to make that nice and flat right there, straight. That little section of binding. Okay, I've got a little bubble right there. There we go. Trying not to hide the camera. So I'm going to go into the corner. Give me just a second. I got to push this pin out just a little bit. Okay. We're going to go into the corner again. I'm going to leave that pin in there so it won't move. Okay. Drop my needle, and now I'm going to go around the corner. So let's see how I did on this corner. Ooh, I did pretty well on this one. So I don't think I need to reposition. I think I'm okay. Ooh, I think I did okay on this one. So I think we're going to be good. Yeah, so my notch is right on the edge of my binding. So I just went around the corner. So sometimes I hit it pretty well, but sometimes I don't. It just depends on, so I can reposition it if I need to. Keeping that little notch right on the very, very edge of my binding. Okay. Second here, we got some tails. Going around here. Sometimes I think it's better just to show me doing the entire binding. I know it takes a little bit longer, but that way you can see it from start to finish and see the, you know, if I run into a problem, I can show you how to fix it. So, all right, let's go around here. We're just about down to the next corner. And I can zigzag pretty fast now. I'm getting a lot better at this, so I've been doing these bindings for quite a while. But it's nice to have a binding video right with the cutie, all the cutie videos for the whole year, so you can go in and look at that folder and also find the binding video. And this is how I do most of my binding. Okay, get it lined up. Trying to keep that in line, nice and covered. And my thread matches pretty well. I thought I had one that was just a little bit darker, but I couldn't find it. So this one's a little bit light, but it looks pretty good for the gray. And this is a Pima cotton thread that I like. It's a number 50 thread that works really well for binding. And it's thin, so it doesn't really show. You know, the stitches don't show as much because it's a thinner thread. Okay, so second here, I got to get this all lined up here. Getting ready to go into the corner. Second here, I've got this is kind of bumpy on me. Okay, and I'm going to pull back a little bit on this corner so that it flattens out. Got a string hanging there. I may have to cut it later. Okay. Got to make sure I don't hit the end of the pin here. So we're just going to go slowly into the corner. Okay, staying right on the edge, and then I'm going to go into the corner. Then we'll see how we did on this corner. Ooh, I think I did okay on this one too. Put my foot down. Oh, yeah, right on the edge. That's good. So we don't have to reposition this one either. Get everything lined up. All right, and then go out of the corner. Straight ahead. I am getting better at it. I've had a lot of practice, so I've been doing the bindings like this for quite a while. I'm going to go ahead and trim these little tails off so they don't get stuck in my stuff. Okay. All right, we're just about to the end again. But I actually don't mind doing binding now. After I discovered this method, and I kind of changed some of the stuff from the videos I watched because it didn't work for me, and I just kind of changed the sizes of my stitches a little bit. I've really gotten so that I can do a pretty nice looking binding without having to hand stitch it. Okay, so we're getting close here. So I've got all these tails down here, so we're going to hide these tails and trim them off maybe. One of my fabrics is really ravelly. Okay, now I'm getting very close down here to the end, so I'm going to put a pin right where I started so that I don't like to go over where I started more than maybe a stitch because it kind of shows, so you don't want it to really show. So I like to stick a pin there so I can know exactly where to stop. Okay, so we're getting real close here. Get it all lined up. Okay, just got a few inches left. So I've got a little spot that wants to uncover on me. There we go. There we go. So just take your time. And, you know, sometimes I sew real slowly. It depends on the colors sometimes that I'm working with. Like this is a little easier to see because it's a gray. But sometimes I have a hard time with black. And like if I do black binding, I have to really take my time. All right, navy blue is another one that's hard. Okay, so we're just about to the pin. Now, I don't want to take more than a stitch or so over because it kind of shows. So kind of try to stop right where you started. There we go. About right in there. I'm going to go ahead and tie off with the little polka dot button. And then clip. And I think we got our binding on. Woohoo, look at there. Okay, so I'm going to trim this up. This is our little tail we had at the beginning. And then we can take these pins out. Let's see here how we did on our back. So I can show you what's neat about this is I like to see the back because the trick is if you sew with the stitch off the binding and the stitch on the binding, normally on the back the stitching, I don't know if you can see it, is right on the edge of the binding where that nice crisp seam was. And if you're careful, it sews right on the binding. And that's why it's so important to get a nice crisp seam back here with the iron. So this really looks pretty good. It's all the zigzags are right on the edge of my binding. When I did the binding like that with the straight stitch, I never hit the binding. I was never hitting it. I was always off, and it looked funny on the back. So this to me looks quite nice, and it doesn't show much at all. Okay, so there's our binding. We did the binding with the machine. Sew it on the back, flip it to the front, and zigzagged it on. And the next step for this one is I have to put the little flowers on. So I'm going to do that, and that will be doing of course in our class. So I haven't quite got this finished yet, but I'm going to press this a little bit, and then I'm going to finish doing the decorations. So thanks for joining me for this binding video for the Kimberbell Cuties, and we'll be doing 12 of these. I'm very excited about doing these. They're so cute, and they're all different and different blocks, and so they just are so much fun. Thanks a lot, everybody.